views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. The top national headlines have shifted from week to week and then day to day, from the impeachment trial to conflict in Iran and then back to the impeachment trial. So tonight we thought we'd bring back to BronxTalk a professor and writer and columnist who's a foremost expert, particularly on the Middle East. And we'll see if we can provide some clarity as to the conflicts, problems, and hopefully even potential solutions. He's a specialist in Middle East politics and affairs, focusing on international negotiations and conflict resolution. Please join me in welcoming back to BronxTalk a professor and senior fellow at NYU Center for Global Affairs and senior fellow at the World Policy Institute, Dr. Alon Ben-Meir. Nice to see you again.
Thank
and nice to have you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me
As
again.
we were talking just before the show, the last time you were here was actually years ago. And we were talking about individual countries at that time.
Yes.
And now we're back with a capital, with a four-letter word, Iran. And now we're back to talk about Iran. So let's rewind the clock a little bit and talk about a little background before we bring to what's happening today. Let's talk about the Iran nuclear deal that was cut by President Obama with association with many of our Democratic allies. What did you think of it?
I think the Iran deal certainly was a very good deal. I'm not going to suggest it was a perfect one, but it was a deal that ensured that Iran would not be able to acquire nuclear weapons for a decade, if not more so than that. It limited Iran's ability to enrich the uranium to a certain level, also the quantity. Iran accepted also totally unimpeded inspectors and monitors to see what Iran has been doing. And the whole idea behind the deal was, it was good in the way it stood, but the idea was to build on it, and to build on it, make it more stronger and better over time, that eventually lead to normalization of relations between the United States and Iran. That was really the idea behind Obama's approach to this whole deal. And sadly, in fact, I would say even tragically, Trump decided to withdraw from the deal without having any idea as to what can substitute it and where we are today.
Israel was not thrilled with it, and sitting in that seat several months ago, I interviewed Congressman Eliot Engel, who's probably Israel's biggest supporter, or one of the biggest supporters in Congress, and he said, I wanted a deal with Iran, but I didn't want that deal. Talk about the deal and why Israel may not have wanted it, and what the implications of the deal could have been for Israel. You said maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe that was one area where it could have been improved.
Yes, well, look, from day one, Netanyahu rallied against the deal. And I'm sure you remember he came to the United States by the invitation of the then Speaker of the House, what was his name?
The former Speaker of
the former Speaker of the House, a Republican, in any event, against the wishes of President Obama. And he came to speak to the joint session of Congress against the Iran deal. And I go to Israel regularly, I speak to a top official there, and I said, okay, you don't like this deal. Okay, I agree it's not a perfect deal, but what else can you do at this juncture? The idea is to build on it rather than scrap it, because you do not have any alternative. And if you do, how are you going to force Iran to accept anything different or anything less? Specifically, given the fact that they are terrified, going back now nearly 40 years, they are terrified that the United States intend to have regime change in there. And from their perspective, They need to maintain a certain level of dignity, certain level they want respect, and they don't want to be pushed around. And for Netanyahu and Trump to agree that this is a bad deal, let's withdraw from it, without having a substitute, that, in my view, was a disaster.
Can you follow any rationale for abandoning it? I mean, the easy answer is because it was crafted by Barack Obama and he seems to want to undo whatever Barack Obama did, then he pulled out of it. Is there another, whether you agree with it or not, strategic notion for getting out of that deal? Did the deal really put us in a more dangerous place maybe than
I
we
absolutely think so. I think we are in a much more dangerous place today than we were before Trump withdrew from the deal. So you know, there was absolutely no strategy. That is, just like the Obama health care, you know, the affordable health care of Obama, Trump wanted to cancel the entire health care bill when in fact they have no substitute for it. And the same thing here. There was no strategy. What's going to happen next? And I asked many top officials, what's going to happen next? Truly, they have no answer.
You know, when you were describing the Iran nuclear deal as a pact that should be built on, that wasn't perfect, the first thing I thought of was the Affordable Care Act. I don't think any of us, and all of us who, you know, either use it or know people who use it, would feel that, you know what, it's not perfect, and I can personally tell you in many ways that it's not, but without it, I know many people who would be without health care, and that is much worse than dealing with a situation that something has to be built on.
Yeah.
How trustworthy was Iran in that deal? And then, you know, over the summer, they accused Iran of attacking a cargo ship. All of a sudden, you know, you say, well, wait a minute, we're cutting deals with rogue nations, and did we kind of, with the trust through that deal, recraft kind of a relationship?
Well, you know, to begin with, there's no trust. I mean, we cannot.
There's no trust.
We cannot make deals.
Sorry, I'm so naive.
We cannot make deals based on trust. Trust is something you develop, you nurture over time. But to nurture trust, you have to adhere to the deals you make, and this is the prerequisite here. There was zero trust between the two countries. Now they have finally agreed to sit down and reach a certain agreement. That was an excellent beginning. Now you can build on it. And if you build on it and you adhere to all the rules and to the conditions, you begin to build the kind of trust you want between the two countries. And that's what basically what Trump has done, destroyed any prospect of having any good relationship between the United States and Iran.
There was some question as to whether Iran actually was the country that attacked that cargo ship over the summer. It was a U.S. cargo ship. And it kind of led to an unraveling of peace and increasing tensions. You believe Iran attacked, or there's no way to know?
Iranians, the leadership, are not angels. But you have to understand one thing, and I'm sure you know that. They have been under threat from the United States for the last 4 decades. They hear it clearly. Pompeo, Bolton have said time and again, the only thing we need to do is regime change in Iran. And I want you to imagine if you're the leadership in Iran and you're hearing the most powerful country is seeking a regime change, what would you do? And this is where we have to put ourselves in their shoe to understand why they react the way they're reacting. And so, moreover, we have to understand their mentality. This is a country that's been in continuing history for 4,000 years. They have a tremendous natural and human resources. They are the most critically important geopolitical, geographic area. They're very proud people. They seek respect, and you cannot push them around. So if you want to negotiate with someone who has that sense of themselves, you need to understand it, and you negotiate on that basis without constantly insulting them and disrespecting them.
Well, talk about insulting. The killing of General Qasem Soleimani seemed to come out of the blue. Talk about him and his history. It's been, said that he had to go. He was, killed Americans, was threatening to kill more Americans. Again, aside from the strategic implications, which obviously we're going to get to in just a moment, was he a dangerous person? And you look at him like maybe you look at Osama bin Laden, who had also committed serious atrocities. Did he have to go? Was it the kind of a killing, kind of assassination unfortunately an American president has to engage in.
It is unfortunate, and we have to understand something. Whether he certainly was a bad person as such is no question. He was the one who developed, finance, and helped develop militia in Iraq, in Yemen, in Syria. He has plotted many terrorist activities against American interests, against Israeli interests. So he's not exactly a good guy per se. But we have to distinguish, however, between Soleimani, who was, by all accounts, the second most powerful man in Iran and an official for government for Iran, versus, say, Al-Qaeda, that is Osama bin Laden or Baghdadi. These two are head of organizations, terrorist organizations, not recognized by international community. They have terrorized the Middle East in particular. So to kill them, to get rid of them, that is perfectly legitimate. But if we're going to start now killing head of states or deputies of prime minister or president, country by, what kind of a global order are you going to end up with? So it's not a question when he was good or bad, deserve it or not deserve it. He may very well deserve it. But we cannot afford to begin assassinating head of states or deputies or one of the most strongest men in Iran. That is simply totally and completely inconsistent with the kind of world order we want to protect.
Especially in a situation where nothing was apparent and it wasn't like he had just amassed a group and, you know, of course, the question of imminent threat has been put out there consistently and now very, very questionable. Was there an imminent threat?
Well, based on
hard
everything,
to imagine.
no,
Measure.
Based on everything we've seen, there was no imminent threat. As a matter of fact, the plan was to kill him 7 months ago. Why now? Why now? To me, as clear as the day. He is impeached. He's facing trial in the Senate. The debacle over the Ukraine. This is Trump well known to try to change the subject. And he chose that particular moment. There was no threat, and the government, that is neither Pompeo and all this who came to brief the Senate, did not produce a single piece of evidence that there was in fact an imminent threat.
Well, I think that has been essentially debunked. So,
Yeah.
so that is done now, and now you've got, which we saw on television, we saw the pictures in the newspapers, that there are hundreds of thousands, potentially, maybe even millions of people marching and protesting against the United States. I think it was scary, frankly, as an American. You would look at that on TV and say, well, wait a minute, did we stir things up and open the door for issues? But then the Iraqis shot down that plane. Of course, it took a little while to unravel. The Iranians,
yes.
excuse me,
Yeah.
shot down that plane, and it took a little while to unravel what actually happened, but it appears that is what happened. Stirred up, potentially, maybe a horrible, tragic error based on the tensions in the region. And now all of a sudden, many of those same protesters are protesting against Iran because they're saying, well, wait a minute, how could you be so irresponsible shooting down our own planes? Sort this out for me. I mean, what is the mood now? Do they still hate the United States, or do they say, you know what? Because President Trump came out and said he supports the protesters.
Look, first of all, they were protesting, as a matter of fact, because of the economic hardship in Iran before the
It always stirs.
Yeah, shooting down the plane. Moreover, the shooting down the plane absolutely was accidental. Iran has nothing to gain, absolutely zero to gain. In fact, entirely the opposite, shooting down a civilian plane.
Well, certainly not.
No, I mean,
Right.
and no one, in fact, disagreed with the premise that it was a mistake. Now, what happened by killing Soleimani? The people who have been now demonstrating against the government because of the economic conditions now came out to the street demonstrating on behalf of the government. Basically, what the Trump has done united the Iranian people a lot more so before than before the killing of Soleimani. That is one of the unintended consequences. The same thing, shooting the plane was one of the unintended consequences. So when you take action of this magnitude without considering the repercussions, I asked my friends in the Middle East the last few days, not a single representative of any government told me we feel better, we feel safer. Israel is much more threatened today than it was 3 weeks ago. Jordan the same. Look what happened in Iraq. As a result of that, now the Iraqi parliament passed a resolution. They want American forces out of Iraq. So now we have destroyed our position in Iraq itself. What happens in totality? Our allies are more threatened. Our influence in the region has been diminished. And there is no plan now where to go from here.
You mentioned Israel. Netanyahu supported President Trump in the killing of Soleimani and through this process. Is he, I hate to put it this way, a rogue as much as any other leader that says, look, it's good for me, but it may not even be good for my country? In other words, my perception is when the whole region is inflamed in this way, when there's anger, it's certainly a democratic country, specifically the United States, Israel is the easiest target. You don't have to go across the world. They can just do things there. Are they more afraid?
But they inflate the Iranian threat as far as Israel is concerned.
You think that's inflated?
I think it's inflated.
Really?
Let me explain. Let me suggest why. They of course, they threaten Israel existentially, that is. But then you have to ask yourself, look at the power equation between the two countries. Israel, for all intents and purposes, has a nuclear weapon. This is not no longer hidden. It's a hidden secret. It has it. Iran knows that if Israel is attacked, you don't have to kill tens of thousands of Israelis. 100 or 200 get killed in Tel Aviv. That's a war that could destroy half of Iran if Israel feel absolutely threatened.
Because their military is so powerful.
Are so much powerful that half of Iran will be devastated. They know that. This is one thing to speak and to threaten, but to act, they think about that very carefully. They're very careful. They're very deliberate. They're very calculating, and they don't make mistakes of this nature. But what Netanyahu, he is pretty much just like Trump. He is corrupt to the soul. Netanyahu I'm sorry to say this, but he will sell his mother to protect his political position, and he will deliver her for that matter. So you have two leaders here who are besieged politically in their own respective countries, and they will do anything at all to stay in power. And that's we are witnessing or seeing today.
I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but then the military action that bombed U.S. bases, and I did see films of what the bases look like. It hits the news while they bombed the bases. They were destroyed, and allegedly Americans found out about it ahead of time and removed many of the personnel. Otherwise, it really could have been a disastrous step toward war. How do you read what Iran did there? And then they were like, well, that's all we did. We just destroyed some property, and now we're moving on. How do you read that?
Well, they needed to react in order because they have a public opinion. Just imagine killing their second most powerful man, and there's no reaction to it. They needed to react. We knew it was coming, but they also knew one thing. If they inflict significant damage and kill many American soldiers, that means they are inviting another retaliation.
I think there would be no question about it. Certainly the president was talking tough, and I don't want to say he would like nothing more, because you hate to think he would, but he really was looking for that distraction from his other issues.
And so I also, we need to understand, neither Iran nor the United States with Trump want war. They really do not want to have an all-out war. So what the Iranians have done, yes, retaliated. They made sure, however, to attack facilities, knowing there will be the least casualties, if any at all. That was absolutely deliberate.
Do you think they forewarned the Americans, or kind of let it be known that was what was going to happen?
You know, we have to know that Iran is all over Iraq, everywhere. Iran has better intelligence than any Iraqis or any other country in the Middle East.
Really?
They know exactly what is these bases. And they know exactly, if we're going to attack this, we want to inflict the least casualties, because we have to stop the vicious cycle of retaliatory attacks.
I want to rewind the clock a little further back and tap into one of your real expertises, and that's the notion of Turkey and what happened in Syria. The U.S. pulled out troops, and essentially President Trump said that he had cut a deal with Erdogan to, we'll pull out, and then you can move into an area that you've always wanted to occupy. How do you read what happened there? Do you view it much like you viewed losing the Iran deal as a big mistake?
I
What
think
do you
I
see?
think it's from a moral perspective, it's much worse.
Much worse.
Much worse, because here you have allies, the Kurds, who've been fighting alongside the United States to defeat ISIS. Thousands of their fighters died in these battles, thousands, and they were our most trusted allies in that area. And all of a sudden, one morning, he gets a whim, and Trump decides to withdraw our forces from Syria, basically inviting Erdogan, the ruthless, the most brutal leaders that Turkey ever had, to come in and basically enter Syria and begin fighting the very Kurds that they were so close allies to the United States.
The decision aside, is there a political or other objective for President Trump in the United States to do that? The suggestion has been out there that it was done so that Russia could have greater influence in that part of the world.
Well, I mean, that would be a natural consequence. If you withdraw from Syria, Russia is already prepared to always step in and take over.
I think it happened within a day.
Within a day, and that perfectly was known to Trump and his advisors. So that is
And how do you measure that? I mean, what could have or would have been
I mean, it doesn't take really geniuses to look at the situation there. If you're taking American troops from here and you're vacating bases, Russia is the power broker in Syria. No one else. Turkey has influence, Iran has a great deal of influence, but not as much as Russia. So when these bases were vacated, they immediately stepped in. This was a given. We know that's going to happen.
President Trump said, we've got the oil now. Do you think, and he, I guess, would quote unquote justify it as a result of that? It's somewhat illegal to do that, right?
Not just illegal, it's just completely stupid. I'm sorry to say that. I mean, what
That's why
oil?
we brought you, because you don't mince words.
What oil? You know, Syria has oil, but say compared to Iraq or Saudi Arabia or Iran, it's completely insignificant. We're talking about very small oil reserves in Syria. So to suggest we have to go to Syria to protect our oil there, it
just didn't make sense.
No sense whatsoever.
And the result, we saw many of the pictures and footage of ISIS members being, in essence, freed. One would think that did not help our own prospects for peace in the world.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And now what you have, Turkey is in Syria, doing everything possible to establish permanent foothold in that country. Now you have a country basically occupied partly by Turkey, Russia, and Iran, and then you still have the civil war going on. Basically, what we have done, his decision to withdraw the support from the Kurds, basically subjected now Syria to ongoing conflict for many more years.
Many more years. I said at the top of the show that maybe we would provide some solutions. So I pulled out something off your website. I'm going to actually read it. Unless some drastic measures, these are your words, are taken, the various conflicts in the Middle East will become ever more intractable and exact a horrifying toll in blood and massive economic dislocation. The continuing severity of these crises and their repercussions will depend on whether or not the combatants assume a realistic posture or new leadership rise and commit to finding an equitable solution that can endure. What has to happen? This was written in kind of a prediction or a prospectus for 2020. What has to happen, or what do you expect to happen? Give us some look at the future of this region and how, goodness, we're all looking for peace, aren't we?
Well, we want peace, and this is a region that's been in turmoil now for many, many years. I mean, you can go back to, as far as I'm concerned, to 1917, 100 years, from the time Balfour granted the Jews the right to establish a home of their own. So this is a country that's been plagued by conflicts, a region plagued by conflicts. So if you look at the Middle East today versus what you say even 4 years ago. 4 years ago, under the Obama administration, we had an idea what's going on. We did not agree with his foreign policy. I did not agree with his approach to Syria, for example. I think President Obama should have done more to prevent the tragedy the likes of which we haven't seen since World War II. What's happened in Syria, over 700,000 people died. Half the country between refugees or internally displaced. Horrible, horrible. Look at what's happening in Iraq since 2003. We're still there 19 or 17 years later. What Trump has done with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, he made it considerably worse than it's ever been before. Why? What he recognized Jerusalem, legalized the settlement, giving the green light to go and annex the Jordan Valley. He's basically killed the prospect of a two-state solution.
Any progress that had been made.
And that wiped out. That's gone. So what you have today, you look at every single country, be that from Saudi Arabia and Yemen, that war is totally, it's a human disaster. And who's supporting that war? The Trump administration, through the Saudis. So you have to look at Yemen, you look at Syria, you look at Iraq, you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you look at Lebanon with Hezbollah there. We are in a state where a region is on fire. And what Trump has done basically added the fuel to the fire.
So we got about 30 seconds. What has to happen, and I mean, certainly your suggestion would be, you say regime change, leadership change in the United States, but what policies would need to happen? In your talking with Israelis, for example, what would they like to hear? So that we would move, the needle forward toward peace.
Well, sadly, the Israelis are very skeptical, and as a matter of fact, the last 10 years they moved more so to the right, and on which, of course, Netanyahu capitalized. But the current leadership, be that Israeli, Palestinian, Iran, Syria, will not be able to settle these conflicts. You need a new leadership, and you need American leadership, really American, strong, powerful leadership that is going to reinvest in the Middle East. I'm not talking economically. Time, energy, resourcefulness.
Human capital,
That's
negotiation.
Right. In order to change the dynamics
Dr.
again.
Alon Ben-Meir, I know why we haven't had you, because we haven't had these kinds of conflicts, but having you here to help sort it out has really been a blessing.
It's
my
pleasure. My pleasure, of course.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alon Ben-Meir. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. You send us a tweet at BronxTalk, or you post them on our Facebook page. Next week, changing gears as usual, it will be the 2020 census and what that means to our borough of the Bronx. We thank our producer, Helen Greenberg, the director, Nick Marrero, and we'll see you then next week. Good night.